very warm welcome to everybody. It's really great to see so many of you online. Thank you very much for making time to participate in this online consultation. Firstly, before we get started, allow me to point out that simultaneous interpretation from English to both Spanish and French is available for this meeting. And you can access the different language channels in the Zoom navigation bar at the bottom of your screen, next to your share screen button, and by clicking on interpretation, and then you can select the preferred language. Bienvenue à cette réunion Zoom. Je voudrais juste vous informer que l'interprétation simultanée anglais-français est disponible pour cette réunion. S'il vous plaît, cliquez sur interprétation ci-dessous dans la barre de navigation Zoom et sélectionnez la langue de votre choix. Bienvenidos a todas y a todos. Hay interpretación simultánea inglés-español disponible para esta sesión. Por favor, haga clic en Interpretación en la barra de navegación Zoom y seleccione su idioma de preferencia. The purpose of this online consultation today and for connecting with you is to collect your feedback and comments on the draft of the ISC action plan for the next 3-year term, and of course to answer any questions that you may have. We first shared the draft document about 4 weeks ago, so we very much hope that this provided you with enough time to read the document. As you know, the action plan for the period 2022-2024 forms a practical framework for the ISC's work and sets out the ISC activities and projects during these coming 3 years. And well, we very much hope that our members and our affiliated bodies will continue to contribute to the implementation and the delivery of the ISC action plan, and as you have done during the previous 3 years. And the way you can contribute to the implementation of the current and the future action plan is through our various calls to action for the different projects that are going on in parallel that reach you via the weekly membership update emails, such as calls to nominate experts, calls to participate in surveys, calls to review and comment on draft documents and reports, etc. If you have been away and you've missed some of these emails, you can always find all of the current calls to action opportunities on the ISC membership notice board. And Genia is just going to add the link to the notice board here in the chat again, so you have it handy. And let me mention that you will also be able to receive these opportunities soon via WhatsApp, something we're working on since a few members have asked us to open up this communications channel. If you do not have any particular comments on the draft action plan just yet, or if you don't want to share your comments live today, please be invited to submit your feedback on the draft via the online form that is available until 13th of August at the link that is now being added to the chat as well. So all of the comments received today and tomorrow during these online consultations and also via the feedback form will be considered by the ISC Governing Board, and the final draft action plan will be presented to all ISC members for adoption at our online General Assembly in October. I'm just going to rush through a couple of more housekeeping points before we get things underway. So the meeting is being recorded today and also the session tomorrow, and we'll make the recordings, of course, available and share it together with the presentation given later on the membership section of our website after the meeting. And also subtitles are available for this meeting, and to enable them, you can click on the live transcript function in the Zoom navigation bar at the bottom of your screen, and then click either show subtitle or view full transcript. We will be speaking a bit slowly and with some longer pauses in between in order to allow for our interpreters to catch up with the interpretation. So I will now hand things over to Heide Hackmann, who is the ISC's Chief Executive Officer, and who will give you a brief introduction to the draft action plan, before we then open up the floor for your comments and questions. And this is when Alison Meston, the ISC Communications Director, will also come in to moderate the discussion. So Heide, you've been very much involved in drafting and shaping this draft action plan for the 2022 to 2024 term. And we're really looking forward now to hearing what is being carried over from the current plan and what is new on the ISC's priority agenda for the next 3-year term. So over to you, Heide.
Thanks very much, Anne, and a warm welcome to all the colleagues online. Thank you so much for joining this session. I'm we are grateful for your engagement, and I really look forward to our discussion today, particularly to your questions, but also your critical and creative insights and ideas as we work towards finalizing this action plan. And you're going to share slides?
Yeah.
So I think we can go straight on to the second slide. Colleagues, as Anne has indicated, I am working on the assumption that you have all read the document. So what I'm not going to do is summarize the content, but rather give you a sense of some of the background, reflect a little bit on, why we're doing action plan, what was in the first action plan, and how we see that moving into a second action plan, and just draw your attention to one or two highlights. So it is useful for us to remember that the whole idea of action planning actually goes back to our 2017 General Assemblies of what was then still ISSC and ICSU. And at that October meeting, joint meeting of the two predecessor organizations, we adopted a high-level strategy, which, apart from setting out the vision, the mission, and the strategic objectives of the council, it also set out some broad parameters for how the council should operate. And one of the ideas was that we would do 3 yearly action plans rather than what was in the past 5-year, more generic, abstract strategies or strategic plans. So action plans that are comprehensive, that cover our scientific, substantive activities, but also broader organizational development priorities around governance, membership engagement, outreach, resourcing, etc. And that these plans would be adopted every 3 years by you, the members, in order to guide and mandate essentially the governing board to implement, but also to allow us to give us a framework for monitoring and reporting on our activities. So that's where the whole idea came from. Next slide, please, Anne. I hope you're all very familiar with the first action plan. I think reflecting back on it, for me, obviously, given that it was the first plan, in many ways, it set a strategic baseline which extends beyond the 3-year planning cycle. So what that plan did, it first of all, it did a fairly detailed analysis of what was then the contemporary global context for science and for the work of international, or for the context for international scientific collaboration, therefore the context for the ISC's work. And it launched, initiated a portfolio of new targeted projects, priority projects and programs. So really taking not only the legacy activities of ICSU and ISSC and showing how those would be carried forward, but really giving us a new portfolio, a new profile of activities in the domains of science for policy, policy for science, and freedom and responsibility in science. It also, as a new organization, set out a fairly ambitious agenda of organizational development actions around outreach and engagement, our regional presence, and resource mobilization. Now, in the 3 years since the publication of the plan, we have made good progress on all fronts. Clearly, with the COVID pandemic, we have experienced delays. Some projects have been postponed or the starting dates have been delayed, but essentially there has been good progress on all the activities that we announced in that first action plan. And here we don't have time today to go into great detail. So what you will receive in September is a detailed ISC activities and achievements report, which will reflect not only on the progress made in response to the actions, but will also give you a sense of the rich diversity of new activities that were not anticipated in 2019. Clearly, COVID-related projects, but also new opportunities that the Council has responded to, new requests for partnerships, et cetera, and suffice it to say, it's been a very, very intense and busy 3-year period. I'm happy in the discussion to take questions about this progress, but I think that's not the focus now of our discussion today. Next slide, please. What is important in reflecting on the first action plan and this 3-year period we've had in running a new organization are some of the lessons we've learned in this period. And these are lessons that we felt it would be important to absorb in going forward with new action plans. So first and foremost, I've mentioned new activities, new opportunities, global events that none of us anticipated adequately. And what we've learned is that we need to be pragmatically flexible with our action planning. There was a sense in which the first action plan went to a level of detail that in practice we needed to adjust and work around, and that we should take that as a lesson for future planning. This speaks to the agility of the Council to respond to ongoing developments and emerging opportunities. It's also clear from the last 3 years that in addition to doing what we said we'd do, the extent of the requests that have come our ways to support new activities, to become a partner in activities, etc., means that we need to much more clearly articulate a set of criteria and principles for assessing those opportunities and requests and setting priorities. This speaks to the danger of operational overstretch. We remain a very small secretariat. And so the ability to respond effectively and to implement all those activities with equal efficiency and efficacy means being clearer about guidelines for assessing and setting priorities. And that speaks to the third bullet point on there. Very importantly, we have grappled with understanding the best ways of engaging you, our members, not only in terms of keeping you updated and sharing information, but really drawing on your strengths and expertise in the design and delivery of our specific projects and programs. And that's something that we feel we can do better on, despite tremendous progress that has been made through the work of Alison, our communications team, including Anne, our membership liaison officer, in strengthening membership outreach and engagement. We really feel that the involvement of members more directly and actively in our projects is an issue that we need to improve. In a related way, what we've realized is in taking on such a big new profile of targeted projects, substantive projects and programs, we really need to draw on external scientific leadership. And this comes with new expectations of board members, many of whom have become involved in the steering groups, but also representatives of member organizations and of our programs, for example, and scientists from our external wider networks to become involved in helping us steer and guide the delivery of particular projects. And finally, we've learned that there's still a lot of work to do in terms of how we anticipate, but also measure the impact of our activities. That remains an important challenge for us and a difficult one. Next slide then. And so this takes us to the new draft of the new action plan, the second one for the period 2022 to 2024. And given what I've said, suffice it to say, we don't see this, I think the language we've used in the draft is that this is an evolution rather than a revolution. We're not starting from scratch. It is a plan that is intended to build on what we have put in place and what we've achieved to date. And it's a plan that's intended to respond to the lessons that we've learned during the first planning cycle. Clearly, it picks up on those lessons in terms of, if you look at the content, it articulates much more clearly some guiding principles and criteria for our work. These also speak to the positioning of the ISC in the broader international scientific landscape. There is an update of the what we call the evolving global context for science and some of the new directions for scientific priorities are intended to speak to that update. And then very simply, it focuses on a set of scientific priorities, which if you compare it to the first action plan, perhaps not as detailed in terms of going into the particulars of each project, but rather focus more generically on domains and priority themes. We'll come back to that. And then a set of organizational priorities that again draw, on or spell out actions across the governance, outreach and engagement, resource mobilization functions of the council. Good. So if we then move on, what I want to do, and I'm not going to summarize the content, but just to give you a sense of highlights of the scientific priorities, and then we'll look at the organizational priorities. So when it comes to the scientific priorities, I want to talk you through the kind of structuring that we've used. And here, what's important is that we feel it is important to continue with the 219 domains of action. Some of them have been widened, altered slightly. So for example, in 2019, we had the first domain was on the 2030 agenda and the 17 sustainable development goals. We've broadened that to a domain on global sustainability, recognizing that we need to think beyond 2030. When it comes to issues around the digital revolution, we have widened the scope of this domain, and it's now called Converging Science and Technology in a Digital Era, recognizing that the impacts of digitalization processes are widespread across the sciences and across societal issues. But the other domains remain the same. What is different here is that instead of treating issues around the freedom and responsibility in science as a separate section, we've included this as part of making sense of the broader portfolio of scientific activities and science communication projects that the ISC is involved in. And our new COVID projects that were developed in the last year are also included in this package. Per domain, the board decided to identify priority themes. So effectively, we have now 14 priority themes, and we'll go through what those are. What you will find in the document is that for each theme, we give an overview of the council's activities. First of all, let me say, and I will again highlight this, there are some themes where we don't yet have activities. So there are intended themes to be developed in the coming 3 years. But for most of the themes, we give you an overview in the document of the existing activities that are ongoing. And it's important to say that those activities include things we've been doing since 2019 and sometimes before. So in other words, the legacy activities that we are still engaged in from the predecessor organization's time. They include activities that were announced in the 2019 action plan that have not been completed and that are ongoing. They include all the new activities. So in some ways, that overview does give you already a sense of the progress that has been made in the last 3 years. And they highlight or flag activities that we feel should be developed, where there's nothing ongoing yet. And then just to say, it's at the level of activities where a lot of our detailed implementation planning clearly happens, but you will find in the overviews an indication per activity of what is the ISC role, and you'll see there are many activities that we are leading on, but there are also an equal number of activities where we are a partner or a co-lead of initiatives that are run by others. It shows you who those partners are, and it gives you a sense of the impacts that we hope to achieve with those activities. So that's how we've structured, and try to, with that structure, make sense also for ourselves and for our members and partners and the external world, the rich diversity of activities that we are actually engaged in and want to become engaged in. If we look then at the next slide, just look briefly at the domains and the themes. What I've tried to show here in the slide is you'll see a kind of evolution with the columns that say 219 since and for development, is to try and give you a sense of the evolution of activity generation. So 219 or before, it should actually read activities that we've developed since 2019, and then highlighting where we've announced activities that we feel should be developed in the coming 3 years. So under the first domain, global sustainability, no new themes. These are all active themes that we are already engaged in. Transformations, the issues of human health and development, and systemic risks and global emergencies. We've got activities in all 3 themes. However, the board has flagged in the plan that at the activity level, under human health and development, we need to do something more on health, issues of public health, of the burden of disease, and also of potentially on mental well-being. That we would need to scope and develop in the coming 3 years. And equally, under the theme of systemic risk and global emergencies, clearly there is a need for the Council and its members and partners to take stock of what we've learned through also the COVID pandemic in order to look at globally coordinated action around the climate emergency. So 2 new potential activities announced under that domain. In domain 2, on converging science and technology in a digital era, we have digital transformations of the science system itself, ongoing activities, digital technologies for sustainability, a set of new activities in that domain, and particularly here with a focus on environmental sustainability. And here, importantly, the board feels that there is a new set of activities under a new theme to be scoped and developed on the topic of convergent technologies, really looking here at recent breakthroughs in the life sciences, in material science, in neurosciences, often enabled by artificial intelligence, and that clearly that convergence of technologies has both potential benefits for humanity, but also a darker side, and that would require work, a global response from the Global Voice for Science on issues of not only the impacts, but also the ethics and governance of these technologies. The next slide, please, Anne. We go to domain 3, science and policy and public discourse. This is a continuation from the first action plan, public value of science, as a priority theme with new activities developed since the action plan, the ongoing work on science policy interfaces at the global level, and then flagging a new theme around, again, very much drawing on the lessons we've learned from the pandemic on what a new normal for science might entail and how to take that forward. On domain 4, changing practices in science and science systems. Again, this is a continuation of work that was under the domain, which I think in the first action plan is called the evolution of science. We're very engaged in open science. We've developed new activities. We've got a project on science in the private sector, which we would put under the theme of engaged science. But here we feel that the Council's work on advocating through our programs and funding programs for transdisciplinarity warrant a new activity on transdisciplinarity to be scoped and developed. It is becoming, increasingly accepted as an approach to research that is engaged with society. But we feel that there is a lot of work to be done in understanding what transdisciplinarity means in practice for scientists, how we measure and evaluate it, and understand its potential impact on policy and public discourse. And then, of course, the evaluation of science, which again is a continuation from our first action plan. And then when it comes to the work of our Committee on Freedom and Responsibility in Science, we have two themes here, which essentially indicate, on the one hand, an ongoing work around dealing with cases of generic or individual threats to freedom, but new projects that have been developed in the last 3 years around issues of diversity, inclusivity, and a continuation of their work on responsible science. So to sum up then, 2 new themes, 3 new activities, and the rest is about ongoing implementation to work that is already on our agenda. Let's go then to the next slide, which is about the organizational priorities. And here there are 5 clusters of actions that have been proposed. The first is about this point of engaging more effectively with our members. And 3 specific actions here. The first is really to take stock of all the lessons we've learned about membership engagement and to institutionalize and formalize those in the development of an ISC engagement policy. The second one is really critical for me. Those 2 new priority themes and the 3 or 4 new priority activities that are flagged under the scientific priorities. The intention here is not for ISC Secretariat members to do what we normally do, but for us to engage with you, the members, to set up scoping groups, to plan those activities, and to use those new themes and activities to really explore and understand how members can lead on the design and delivery of our actions. In addition to those opportunities that have been flagged by the board in the plan, there is also the intention to invite members at any point in time to express their ideas and to submit their ideas to the board for new activities that they feel the Council should pick up because they require a global response. Those ideas would be assessed by our Committee for Science Planning, which would make a recommendation to the board. So we are trying to, what we're flagging here is not only the wish to involve you more in working with us and with each other, I should say, in designing ISC activities, but also to generate ideas for what those activities should be. And then related to that, very importantly, the board wants to look at mechanisms that would ensure that we can support from from the ISC the full and equal participation of our members from particularly low and middle income countries. This is often an issue for us if we extend the invitation for members to become engaged, that it's sometimes financially not possible for our members in certain countries to do so. The second cluster is it's also about membership, but about expanding the membership base. And I think this goes back to this issue of really taking seriously the idea of developing the organization to be the global voice for science, which is our mission. And we've always said, being the global voice for science is on the one hand about the representation that we have through our membership base, also about our partnerships. We have been expanding our partnerships in the last 3 years. But if you look at the membership base currently, there is room for expansion across disciplines, across regions, but also potentially across types of members. In setting out the idea of expanding the base across those 3 lines, the plan does indicate that we are aware of needing to do this with full transparency. The issue of membership, and particularly of developing new types of members, new membership categories, has potential implications for how the council operates. It could have implications for not only the statutes, but also for the longer term business model of the council. So this is something that we would do transparently, openly, and in consultation and conversation with our members. A third priority for the organizational development, again, is to continue what we have been doing and making good progress on in the last 3 years, which is essentially to continue increasing our visibility and influence as a global voice for science through the expansion of the Patrons Forum, for example, through continued expansion of our partnerships. We have, in the last 3 years, for example, signed concrete partnership agreements with bodies like the Inter-Academy Partnership. We are moving towards doing the same thing with the World Federation of Engineering Organizations. We've got new activity-based agreements with several UN agencies, and that's a trend that we need to pursue to extend to other organizations where our linkages are not as strong as they should be. I think, for example, about the OECD, the World Economic Forum, and we should take cognizance of the fact that there are new emerging international representative voices of science in the global landscape that emerge from time to time. Here, we also thought that given that increasingly with a new portfolio of projects and programs, we are drawing on external experts from members, from partners, from programs to work, for example, on project steering groups. And I see some of you online who are actually involved in those steering groups. We would like to look at the possibility of people who are closely engaged with us, of them becoming ISC fellows, so that we can keep them networked, that they become a resource to the wider goals of the organization and serve as ambassadors for the council. So there's a new idea for a scheme of setting up a scheme of ISC fellows. And of course, recognizing that despite good progress on strengthening our communications capability, that there is further capacity building for us to do in that regard. Fourth, finances, always critical. The 2019 made some set out some ambitious goals for resource mobilization for the council. And here I would just say very honestly that it's been very difficult under pandemic conditions to respond to some of those goals. And so we've picked them up particularly for priority action in the coming 3 years. And they are about engaging with philanthropy and philanthropic giving, understanding the conditions and the practices and principles that should be associated with the council engaging with philanthropy. And that links very much to the idea of the ISC looking at establishing what in 2019 was announced already as the development of a global charitable trust fund. And the idea here is that we would even consider using some of the ISC reserves, which are quite healthy at this stage, to leverage support from donors and others to build such a trust fund and build the core capacity and resource capacity of the organization. Finally, we do feel that in 2023, so in the next planning cycle, 5 years into the development of this new body, the ISC, that it would be good also in accountability terms for us to take stock. And so we would like to discuss with you, the members, the idea of an external review of the council, of the directions it's setting, of how it's operating, how it's responding, and to do so in 2023. Next slide, please, Anne. So colleagues, that's it from my side. I hope that's been helpful to you. We very much look forward to our discussion today. And just to remind you, as Anne has done already, that the more detailed written comments are welcome via the online form by mid-August. Alison, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Haida. Thank you for that comprehensive discussion from yourself on the next action plan. And now it's time to hear your feedback as members. And can I ask, if you have comments, to please raise your hand in the Zoom function. And I'd like to ask you to give your feedback and ask your questions succinctly. Before we start the feedback session, we are going to start with a quick poll, and you may recognise this question if you've already been on our feedback form on our webpage. So Anne's going to put this quick poll in, and that is, does the 2022-2024 action plan as a whole respond adequately and appropriately to the ISC's vision and mission? So Anne, can I ask you to just lodge that poll?
Yeah, it's coming. So.
And
I think I think we're facing some difficulties.
Yeah, we're facing some difficulties. So we'll hear your feedback. I think we won't if we're having trouble with the poll and the gremlins are in, then we'll just head straight to the feedback. So we're now going to get your opinions on the ISC's proposed priority themes and how they align with organisational priorities. But let's also first now talk about framing the feedback discussion around global scientific and societal priorities. So, for example, we might like to consider whether the action plan is sufficiently balanced in its selection of domains that Haida spoke about, the domains and the 14 priority themes, or whether there's anything that has been missed and that the ISC as a global voice for science should include in its second action plan. So members, it's over to you. And I see Michelle Spiro. Bonjour, bienvenue, Michelle. Can I ask Genia spotlight Michelle for his question? Thank you. Michelle, are you on mute? Michelle, we can't hear you. Can I ask that you type your question into the chat function? And perhaps while you do that, we'll go to somebody else because we can't hear you speak. So while Michelle is sorting out his speaking, yeah, we still can't hear you. Can I ask that you type your question into the chat function, and we'll come back to you. Is there somebody else who would like to come in while Michelle works out his audio?
I think Michael wants to come in.
I do. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
That's
Thank
good.
you, Michael.
Well, firstly, congratulations, because it's no mean feat to do this under the circumstances that we're all working. So I just wanted to make a point. I've made it before in relation to the existing action plan, and that is about education, because it's implicit rather than explicit. And I think it's probably a little bit more explicit in this new version than it was. But there is something, I think, missing from the preamble that was, I thought, really nicely phrased in the existing one. And under the ISC vision and mission, there was a sentence about the practice of science must be inclusive and equitable, also in opportunities for scientific education and capacity development. Now, there's no need why everything should be copied over from a previous version, but I liked that the use of the word education, and I don't think there's been any time since I've been involved with the ISC that education has been more important than it is now, given what we're seeing around the issue, for example, of anti-vaccination, that educating the broader public, now it's there because it's mentioned in terms of public engagement. But I mean, I think it is about actually educating not only the public, of course, because education starts from grade 1 or before. And I think if a lot of the sort of principles that are very clear in this, and I think there's some wonderful new additions, you know, in the domains and in the particular priority themes, that obviously we want to educate ourselves and our children and grandchildren, etc., around these issues. So I just wonder if that could again be just brought out a little bit more forcefully, because many of us, not all of us, I know in the ISC, are involved in education one way or the other. I mean, you know, we're researchers and educators, lots of us, in the unions at least, in the universities system. So we're all engaged with this. Many of us are engaged in this. I think that's why I'd like to see it out there a little bit more. But on the whole, I'm really quite pleased to see some of these new initiatives. So well done.
Michael, thank you very much. Heide, would you like to respond to that? And then we'll come back to Michelle's question.
Thanks, Alison. Thank you, Mike. Good to see you. You know, I mean, I think this issue, I think you're right to flag this, Mike. At my time at ICSU, starting in 2015, it's come up time and time again. Every time we have a discussion with members, there is this issue of science education being a priority. And to put it briefly and bluntly, perhaps, it's, you know, I think there's such a wide understanding of what it means, and it's got lost in translation. As you rightly say, some of it is around, it's embedded in our public value of science and science for policy and public action, and other projects certainly have an element of science education in it as well. I take your point that we, in the framing of the set of priorities, we need to be more explicit about this. So this is a challenge for the board, and an important one. You're right that in 2019 there was good explicit language around this, and I think we may have lost that. So thank you for raising that.
You may, if I may just respond very briefly. I'm sure there are more questions coming. I think it is mentioned on, it's through the document now, and in a sense it is there. So just maybe flagging it up front would be, in the way in which the last one did, might be a way of doing this. But actually, I know this was proposed at a previous General Assembly. You know, there was an explicit structure, because you are right. It's a kind of woolly concept, education. It's sort of everywhere. But if there was an explicit structure in the ISC to deal with it, in the way that there is an explicit structure to deal with issues of freedom and responsibility, then perhaps, you know, it might be more targeted and targetable, if that's such a word. Anyway, that's just an idea. I know that I've raised it before, and I don't want to sound like
Alison, I would also want to use this as an example, Mike, to say this is the kind of issue that you could imagine through members' involvement could be part of the scoping of a new theme like the new normal for science, could be the new normal for science and science education. Alternatively, if a member or a group of members felt there is a specific, very concrete, focused activity around science education that requires the ISC's engagement, that's the kind of idea that we would invite members to propose to the council. And, you know, clearly we would need to work with members in terms of what would the Committee for Science Planning need to see in order to consider taking on a new global activity. But that's the kind of idea we could look towards members for.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks very much for your question. And Haida, in fact, Michelle's question that he's typed to us is along similar lines around members coming together and looking at themes. And Michelle says, great action plan, everything is in it and well phrased. But again, he's bringing up the issue about grants for inter-union studies, like lessons learned from COVID-19, equality, diversity and inclusiveness in science or open science. And in the past, there were such type of grants, and he feels that they were very useful for unions and also useful for making a name for the organisation, for ICSU at the time, and now, of course, ISC, because it goes directly to the community. So this is Michelle's question, the president of IUPAP. And Haida, I mean, are we back? Michelle, are you?
Yes, I am back.
Oh, we can hear you. Okay, I hope I captured your question.
Yes, you captured very well the question.
Yes, good.
Yes, this is exactly that. I mean, amongst the members of ISC, you have the unions. And as you said, the unions are directly representing and connected to the community. And in the past, these grants inter-unions not only attacked problems which are of interest for ISC, but they made ICSU at that time very well known from the community. And you are losing more and more the connection with the community. You are, I saw again, the projects that you have, they are connected to UN organizations or connected to world academies, but not so much to unions. And the unions are unique for ISC to get connected and known from the community. So again, I plead for coming back to grants oriented towards the problems that you raised in the action plan. I mentioned some problems which are very well known from the community, lessons from the COVID-19, open science, equity, diversity and inclusiveness. And you could again launch together with the unions grants to advance in these problems. But basically, Alison, you said everything.
Haida, you know, I know that the action plan is flexible, and what we've certainly talked about in the Secretariat is the ability for members to form consortiums. So perhaps you could respond to Michelle a bit more about that and the flexibility of the action plan to include that kind of, the exact kind of membership organisation that Michelle is speaking to.
Thanks, Michelle. Good to see you, and thank you for your your input and your question. I mean, I think this issue of inviting members to generate ideas and working with members to make those ideas possible, clearly that will include questions for the board about resource allocation. So in some ways, there is no explicit grants program like ICSU had, but there is that intention of mobilizing ISC resources and working with members to respond to members, to activities generated by members that have global relevance and require global response. So, Michelle, I think that the board, you know, is not going to reinitiate. We will, of course, give them the proposal to do so, but they're not necessarily going to reinitiate an ISC grants program with a call for proposals for 3 years like we had in the last round. But it doesn't mean that the willingness and the intention to create opportunities for members, including our unions, to work together on developing ISC globally impactful activities is not there. It's just in a different format. I know that might sound vague, but that's the best way in which I can respond right now. I would, though, say also, Michelle, that there are other ways in which, you know, there are projects where the unions have been extremely directly and actively engaged. I think, for example, of our work on defining global hazards with UNDRR, which we could not have done without the unions, the COVID work now, and there are many other good examples, and we want to build on those kinds of positive experiences of working with unions.
Thanks, Heide. And yes, and I think the other one was the open science, which I think, Michelle, you had representatives as part of the delegation for that. You know, so I think, as Heide said, it's there, but it's not explicit. So I guess that will be down to the communications team and how we communicate the action plan to make sure that there's an understanding of how we can move forward with that kind of collaboration. Michelle, did you want to respond to Heide, or is that? Okay. Okay, well, we can continue the discussion and questions. Heide, I don't have a hand up from anyone at the moment. I don't know if that's because people are completely in agreement to what you've put up or overwhelmed by our following action plan, but there is a moment now for others to come in with their thoughts or suggestions or comments regarding the action plan.
I would like to intervene, Marie-Lise now.
Marlies, hello, welcome.
I would like to intervene about education. I mean, it's the same thing that we started to speak about. Mm-hmm. I think that one action that we started is to develop more activity with IAP, with the International Academy Panel. And the International Academy Panel has been more involved in education than has been usually ICSU before. And IAP has a big program on climate education, for example, which is developing very well, while ICSU has a program called ICSU Troposphere in ICSU or something like that, Troposphere ICSU, which is sort of going on, but not developing extremely fast. And I think that you should join your effort with IAP, which is more ready to do it than EFC, and develop on this thematic, which is obviously one of the priorities in education, starting with the young kids, because education for climate has to start at almost at the earlier stage. So I think I will raise again this question that I think I did raise in 1918 when we had the General Assembly for the merging. And I think I care a lot for this issue. That's why I do it. Okay.
Marielle, can you just let everyone know which organization you're from?
Académie des Sciences, French Académie des Sciences.
Thank you. And you're referring to, in fact, an ISC funded program, which was TropicSCU, which has finished for that. But again, you raise the important point about education. And as Heide has discussed in the action plan, obviously the climate emergency is one of the key focal points. But she's also mentioned the fact that we have a working agreement with the IAP to work closely. And perhaps, Heide, you could expand on that a bit more from what Marielle has said.
Thanks, Marie-Lise. And again, good to see you. Just to say that it's a good idea, Marie-Lise. In fact, you know, we are touching base with the IAP colleagues regularly. I think it's every 6 weeks or every 2 months we have a meeting where we exchange information, and that has led to much closer collaboration. Okay. But I know that there are plans afoot now for a meeting of the leadership, so the two governing boards or bodies to meet before the ISC General Assembly, in fact. And this is an issue we could raise directly with them and see whether there is a role for us and our members in their ongoing work around science education. It would certainly be a good idea to explore that. Thank you for raising that.
Thank you, Marilise, and I also invite you and everyone on this call to look closely at our transform21.org global science portal for climate. And if, again, that's a sharing knowledge platform, and we are working closely with the COP26 organisers now and beyond. And so if you have ideas about how we can look at an education stream about that to amplify those kind of discussions, we'd be happy to do that. Marilise, did you want to comment? No, she's gone. Okay. Karina, can I bring you in? And Karina, can you let everyone know which organisation you're from? Oh, and you've written it in your thing from Plex. Good. Okay. Karina, over to you.
Yeah. Thank you. Hello to everyone. I'm Karina Batiani from CLACSO, the Latin American Council of Social Science. And first of all, I really want to congratulate, because this is a very strong plan. It is really remarkable how the ICC is now a global voice for science. So congratulations. We share the ICSC view that global sustainability is the greatest and more urgent challenge for science in the 10 years left to achieve the social development goals. But we want to highlight that inequality and poverty need also to be top in the issues addressed for global sustainability. As you know, here in the South, because of the pandemic devastating consequence, we anticipate increased inequality in opportunities to practice science and to access science outputs. So maybe we can highlight this point in the plan. And I will also like to ask which are your thoughts about these concerns and the ICSC role in the activity that we see that are present now in the action plans. And also, I think it is important to mention that we need more presence from Latin America and the Caribbean in the next period. I'm really happy to see that this is already included in the action plan, but I want to highlight it. Thank you.
Thank you, Karina. Heide, I don't know if there was a question really in there from Karina. It was a lovely statement of acclamation, so we really appreciate your thoughts, Karina. Heide, did you want to comment perhaps on the Latin American
Sure.
regional process?
No, I just want to, thank you, Karina, and I'm so good to see good, strong presence from CLACSO today, and of course, you are deeply engaged in many of our activities, and we too would like to work with others in the region in ensuring a stronger regional engagement. That is also part of our ongoing planning around, strengthening our regional presence, particularly after the closure of the regional office in Latin America. So that's ongoing work currently. But I also want to say, yes, you highlight, it is in there, again, perhaps like science education, it's kind of mentioned issues of inequality, particularly in light of the consequences of the pandemic as well. But it is something we could be a little bit more explicit about. And it raises also something, I wanted to use this as an example of important work that is often quite invisible, and we've tried to make it more visible in the plan by including some of the ongoing strategic programs that we co-sponsor, etc. So on the issue of inequality, there is a co-sponsored program on inequality, GROUP, which we co-sponsor with the University of Bergen. And the time is coming for us to review the renewal of that program and to understand also how we engage our members in the further development and profiling of programs like that. Because they have the privilege and the benefit of getting good resources from the University of Bergen, but there is work for us to do in making sure that that program becomes more global in its outreach and its impact. Thank you.
Thank you, Heide. Thank you, Karina. Did you have any further comments to make, or?
No, just to say that we can include and suggest members from the South, especially from Latin America, for this Bergen project.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karina. Do I have any more members who would like to make some comments or suggestions? I see that Zhenya has just put in the Global Research Program on Inequality in the chat function for those of you who want to follow up from that comment from Haida regarding our affiliated bodies.
I'm curious whether we can go back to the poll.
Yeah, let's see if we can go back to the poll. Anne, is the poll dead? Are the internet gremlins defeating us today?
The gremlins are defeating us. Yep.
The gremlins are defeating us, Haida. We're going to have to wait for that poll for members to fill in the form for the 13th of August to get that back. There'll be no pre-polling today. Okay, are there further comments? And I mean, I think some of the things that we've also wanted to hear from you also relate to the proposed organisational priorities as outlined in section 5. Are they appropriate to enable the success of the ISC's operations? How do these relate to your organisational priorities for science? And particularly the mission, the vision that we have as science as a global public good. Juan. Yes, Juan, please come in and let everyone know which member organisation you're from.
Yes, I'm Juan Asenjo. I was president of the Chilean Academy of Science. I was a member of the ISC committee for planning and review and whatever in Paris. And I'm a member of IAP, and I was for 6 years co-chair of IANAS, the Inter-American Network of Academy of Science. And I was one of the founding fellows of the Latin America and Caribbean office of ISC. And this office was very active. Okay, I remember the creation. We were in Panama at the time, and then I think the office was based in Brazil for a while, and then in Mexico. But then it was deemed to be too expensive. As a matter of fact, we had special programs in addition to the international ISC programs in Paris. We had, for instance, a program of education in mathematics, which was original for the Latin American office, Latin American Caribbean, I should say. Okay, but then it became, Mexico realized that it was too expensive to run the office. So then the office had a rather dizzy continuation in some Central American country, which I can't remember which it was, but it was a country that didn't even have an Academy of Science. So it was a bit political, but it was a good idea to have this office. And there were other regional offices, okay, because the priorities in Asia, or the priorities in Africa, or the priorities in the Americas, not just in South America, all the Americas, okay? The lady from social sciences from Latin America was just referring on the poverty in Latin American countries. But the same can be seen in the United States. The difference between the richest people and the average people and the poorest people is something that's all over the world, okay? Even in the so-called developed nations, okay? I was an academic in New York at Columbia University for many years. Then I was an academic in the UK, and so on and so forth. So I think the regional offices had a good purpose. Okay, it was a bit expensive for there was also an interest of having the office in Uruguay at one point. But anyway, Heidi is very well aware of all this. Okay, she was in all these negotiations, but it was a good idea to have regional offices. I know it's expensive and maybe, but for instance, IAP, the Inter-Academy Panel, whatever it's called, has regional offices, okay? And they run on a sort of shoestring, okay? They are quite inexpensive to run, And Llanas, it's not just Latin America, it's the whole of the Americas. And that's very interesting because it includes United States and Canada. But maybe the new ISC, International Science Council, okay, I learned the name, should evaluate having regional offices that could be based in one of the stronger academies, like for instance, Brazil or Mexico used to be, but I think it's quite a good idea.
Juan, I take it from your intervention that you're very passionate about having regional presences, and you'll be pleased to know that the ISC is in the process of determining our regional presence in Latin America through the idea of an ISC champion. And
Good.
absolutely, from my point of view, it's about impact and about organisation and being organised. And so I'm very excited about the new way that the ISC is approaching this, having a regional champion that will then again have the opportunity to make sure that some of the discussions that you've raised, one of which is inequality that has just really shone through since the COVID-19 pandemic. It's really been brought front and centre. And the idea of that regional champions approach will be that it will be developing the priorities from that region. And if the Latin American region, as Karina has pointed out, is saying actually inequality is our #1 priority, then obviously the ISC is going to respond to that. Haida, did you want to add anything to more than what I've just said? From Juan, who I appreciate that you know very well from over the years.
I do want to say hi, Juan. Nice to see you. And as Alison has said, you know, the reason you don't see a specific action in this plan around building new regional presences is simply because it's ongoing work from the first action plan. Actually, we're in the process of developing that one. We're on track. It has been delayed by the pandemic. Delayed, I think, also, as you say, that, you know, the resource constraints, which many national science systems are experiencing new resource constraints, means that we have to go for a model that's more impactful and less costly. And that's the ambition. And we are working across the regions to ensure that new structures are put in place.
Thanks, Haida. Thanks, Juan. Thank you very much. I'm taking your thumbs up as you're happy. Members, let's continue the discussion. Is there anyone else who would like to come in from the floor? If not, it's 10 minutes past the hour. If not, I'm going to go back to Haida, and perhaps you'd just like to give a summary or some closing statements of today's discussion. And then I'll remind people, we'll again put in the link where members can fill in their online comments. And I see that Patricio from Mozambique has already said they're looking forward to getting that information to us. So that's fantastic. Thanks, Patricio. Haida.
No summary from my side, just to thank those who have raised issues. There are important issues about how we frame and take this forward. You know, colleagues, for me, I must say that personally, I'm pleased with the plan because I think it does justice to the complexity of our profile of activities in a way that perhaps the first action plan didn't do. It's more comprehensive in that sense. It picks on clearly the critical issues, but I also think it builds on what we have achieved. And I really look forward to us sharing with you our report on activities and achievements. That's work that colleagues who are online are currently working on. And so just great thanks from my side for your continued engagement and your continued support. We count on this going forward, and I look forward to seeing you at the GA.
Thanks, Haida, absolutely. And that's exactly how I was going to finish. We're really looking forward to seeing all of you at the General Assembly in October. We're working very hard to bring you a unique General Assembly that, of course, will be online during these pandemic times. So thank you, everyone. You can come back to the membership page in a couple of days to revisit this, or watch the one tomorrow, which I'm sure will have different questions. And have a good rest of the week. Thank you, everyone, and goodbye.